Today we're going to be presenting some of the results from the Canadian Survey of Cybersecurity and Cybercrime. So this is a product that we just released results from last week on October 15th at Statistics Canada. And it's really a culmination of work that began a couple of years ago in partnership with Public Safety Canada, where we undertook the initiative to measure the impact of cybercrime on Canadian businesses through the development of this survey in order to provide some baseline data. So I'm just going to present a little bit of background information on the survey itself and sort of how that's come together over the last couple of years, and then Mohammad is really going to get into some of the data, some of the highlights that were released last week. So as I mentioned, these were released on our website last Monday, but really the release of that data was a true team effort, both within Statistics Canada, but also due to input and contribution from folks at Public Safety Canada, from DRDC, CSE, and RSCMP. Took a lot of subject matter expertise from those groups in terms of formulating the questionnaire, validating data, and really putting together that survey tool. And then, of course, the support from Benoit, really, as we were setting this up and trying to stand this survey program up, both from himself and then contributions from a lot of people in this room here at SERENE-RISC and the whole organization. So the need for this type of data really was born out of the fact that in building policy and building programs, there was a reliance on statistics and data from outside of government to inform decision-making. A lot of times when we talk about cybercrime, a lot of the information that comes through can be anecdotal in nature. We often see if there's a large data breach, it hits the newspapers, and that's the kind of information that people see and sort of base their assumptions on the impact of cybercrime on. There's also many types of private data sources which can provide valuable information, but may have differing methodologies or a lack of consistency just in terms of how those are run forward. So the goal was really to provide methodologically sound and transparent data which would support evidence-based policymaking and programs. So coming out of that, we did a feasibility study in 2015-16 and kind of looked at the data landscape in Canada, saw what was out there, and how we would meet some of the data needs that were identified to us. And coming out of that, we determined that a cross-economy, enterprise-based survey would be a tool to fill some of these information gaps. As Jeff spoke to earlier, prior to this survey, there were official statistics being produced by Statistics Canada on cybercrime, but those were really only coming through the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey. So we were getting numbers around the police-reported cybercrime, but really we kind of had an understanding that this wasn't a full picture of what was going on. It didn't tend to capture the breadth of the incidence rate or kind of the cost to Canadian businesses. So the data being presented here, it's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of where we could go with this. The project here was designed to provide some baseline data with any survey program such as this. Once we run it the first time, we learned some lessons in terms of the types of questions we've asked. As well, data needs tend to evolve over time, especially in a rapidly changing field such as this. So the study itself is not going to answer all the questions that are out there, but I think it provides an important piece of the puzzle in starting to sort of understand Canada's cyber environment and what businesses in Canada are facing. Going forward as well, I think there's really the focus of this study was on private Canadian enterprises, but I think there is some potential to expand the scope of that, looking at sort of government institutions, public institutions, and nonprofits as well. The data here that we're presenting, I think the work here Looking internationally, this is some of the first survey work that's been done. There has been survey work done by official statistics in the United Kingdom as well. But I think we're quite well situated to provide leadership on measuring the cybersecurity practices of businesses. We're working in conjunction with colleagues at Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development to put some develop indicators of cybersecurity and cybercrime, so there are more internationally comparable indicators that can be used to look across different nations. So the survey tool that we used when we were looking at our sample population, we were looking at any enterprises that had 10 or more employees. So the decision was made to not go any smaller than that, just to reduce the response burden on the smallest businesses in Canada. But by going down to 10 employees, I think it gives us a good picture of those small and medium enterprises where there's often a data gap in understanding how they're investing in cybersecurity, what their understanding of it is, and what the impact of cybercrime on them can be. So the survey went across all sectors. We had over 12,000 firms that were in the sample. And as you can see there, we had a really great response rate to the survey. We actually had identified that as a potential risk of running the survey, was that businesses simply may choose not to tell us what they were doing around cybersecurity. Sometimes it's a closely held secret, but I think we saw really good buy-in from businesses. We had many businesses identify that this was a really important issue to them, and we were really happy to see that great cooperation with the business community as well. The survey was conducted as an electronic questionnaire with phone follow-up where necessary. It was designated as a mandatory survey by the chief statistician, as many of our business surveys are, but that helps to improve the buy-in as well, although we always do seek a cooperative arrangement with businesses in collecting information from them, because if you're a large business in Canada, this will likely not be the last time that you're going to get a Statistics Canada survey. So the survey itself really focused on the economic impact of cybercrime. Anything around sort of cyberbullying or harassment online was out of scope for the survey. And so now what I'll do is I'll pass it over to Mohammad, who will go through a lot of the sort of the key data points that we have there and discuss how we're disseminating the information and how we can make it available as well.
I think I'm going to stand because it allows me to point to certain numbers and makes it easier for everyone else to understand as well. Plus, I've been sitting for too long. So as Mark pointed out, over 12,000 firms. So that was just 12,600, just shy of that number that responded to the survey. And of course, the data was weighted accordingly, so it represents the Canadian population, Canadian business population, mind you. And I'm going to start off with something very, very positive here. Over 95% of Canadian firms in Canada use certain cybersecurity measures. A lot of them use anti-malware software, email security, and network security. However, there are still some firms in Canada, just shy of, or just over 32% of Canadian firms indicated that they didn't use network security, whereas 26% of firms in Canada said that they didn't have any email security, and about 24% of Canadian businesses, which is, you know, a quarter of Canadian businesses saying that they didn't have any anti-malware or software on their devices, which of course is a very simple thing to do in today's environment, where someone can simply go online and download a free software. And if we have policymakers in the room here, that's something we can tackle right away. That's something that we should, you know, I don't want to be making policy while I'm standing here, but that's something that we can tackle just by looking at the data right away. When we look at businesses' use of personally owned devices. This includes mobile devices, cellular devices, laptops. 66% of businesses in Canada said that they allow their employees to use such devices. However, only 47% of these businesses have cybersecurity policies in place to manage those devices. And that's also a scary number in terms of the percentage of businesses that have policies to govern how an employee uses the device for the business activities. And you see the biggest difference in the arts, entertainment, recreation sector, as well as the educational services sector, where universities allow their professors and faculty, admin staff, as well as their students to bring in personally owned devices, but don't actually have a policy in place to manage them. So when we look at whether these practices were required to be implemented by suppliers, customers, or partners, or regulators, 29% of businesses said that that was a requirement in their industry. However, that number does jump significantly when we look at specific industry sectors. 81% of banking institutions said that it was a requirement on their end. And banking institutions, you know, you're thinking of the big five, but it also includes other intermediary providers as well. 79%, so about 80% of health and personal care stores said that they were required to implement cybersecurity measures. And this includes pharmacies, so that's where the big chunk of 80% lies. And about 67% of businesses in the pipeline transportation sector indicated that they were required to implement cybersecurity practices. And so here I'm just trying to build the momentum to some of the bigger figures that you'll be interested in. And we have the breakdown by size, small, medium, large firms. We also have it by industry as well. And if you can think of a pyramid just quickly, at the top we have a 2-digit level NAICS, and it's the North American Industry Classification System, which is used across North America, Mexico, US, and Canada. And that's how you identify, you know, that's how we sort of quantify and equalize industries across the 3 countries. We have the 2-digit, which is, here the 2-digit would be, well, actually there's no 2-digit here. Every one of these would be falling under the 3-digit banner. When we asked, another positive number in my opinion, when we asked businesses whether they had cybersecurity employees or whether they had employees that were primarily responsible for cybersecurity, an overwhelming majority, 74%, said that yes, they did. 67% of businesses said that they had 1 to 5 employees that were primarily responsible for cybersecurity, which, of course, when we say primarily responsible, that's not their only job, but it is their main job on their day-to-day activities. We found that asking small firms whether they had a dedicated employee, well, that really didn't translate. That didn't really exist. When we look at the size breakdown, and we considered small businesses to be anywhere from 10 employees to 49, medium businesses from 50 to 249 employees, and large businesses 250 and over. When we look at that size breakdown, an overwhelming majority, over 90% of large businesses said that they had cybersecurity employees, whereas only 72% of cybersecurity employees or firms had cybersecurity employees. What is also of interest here is that among the 26% of businesses that reported not having any employees primarily responsible for cybersecurity, an overwhelming majority, 56%, indicated that cybersecurity was not a risk to their business. Now that's an interesting presumption on their end, of course, and when we look at which of those businesses said, or which sector indicated that cybersecurity is not a risk to their business, it was the scenic and sightseeing transportation sector. 76% of those businesses said that cybersecurity is not a risk to their business. So if you're a tour operator, perhaps it's not. But when we go down the list, 70% of food and beverage stores said that cybersecurity is not a risk to their sector. And that's interesting as well, food and beverage stores, huh? Other reasons for not having cybersecurity employees, 31% indicated that they use consultants or contractors, so they didn't have any cybersecurity employees internally. But there was also other metrics where it says 14% of businesses in Canada said that they lacked the resources to employ a cybersecurity expert or professional. And about 1% of businesses said they didn't have any employees because they had cyber liability insurance. I'm not going to say anything there. We also asked about training. So after hiring all these employees that are dedicated or primarily responsible for cybersecurity, are you actually training them or other employees that are in your firm or in your business practice? And about more than half said that they were providing general practice knowledge through email bulletin boards, and that was about password complexity and how to sort of identify phishing attempts and perhaps even send them, and what to do with them. Perhaps the organization asked them to send it to their IT team. So about 50% of businesses, or 51%, indicated that they did share general practices. On the lower end, about 20%, or just shy of 20% of businesses indicated that they provided formal training to their employees, and formal training could have been provided in-house or externally by a third party. When we look at the breakdown here, over 50, so close to 60% of large businesses provided formal training to their employees, whereas only 16% of small firms in Canada provided formal training. And that may have to do with costs associated with training, the time associated with training, and the upkeep of that. On average, Canadian businesses spent about $12,000 in the course of 2017 providing cybersecurity training to their employees, customers, partners, and suppliers. For policy partners here, this number is of interest, where only 13% of businesses in Canada had a cybersecurity policy, a written cybersecurity policy to manage or report cybersecurity incidences. Of course, these numbers varied by industry, and you could see some here which surpass the average, and banking and pipeline transportation, of course, reappear from a previous slide, but rail transportation as well. 55% of businesses in the rail transportation industry indicated that they had a written policy in place to manage cybersecurity risks and threats. And speaking to Colleen's point earlier about senior management involvement, about 28% of businesses reported having senior managers oversee cybersecurity risks and threats, while 89% of these businesses reported that they updated cybersecurity actions taken to their senior managers. For the consultants in the room and for those who actually have a cybersecurity software or service that they provide, these numbers are interesting. The bottom half that are slightly darker with those bars, I'm going to speak to those values a bit more. But about 58% of businesses undertook activities to identify cybersecurity risks in 2017. A grand majority of them, 85%, said they monitored their network and business systems, whereas only 38% of businesses monitored their employees' behaviors, which, you know, that's also interesting. Where businesses aren't keeping track of logins and logouts of their systems, that's a fairly small percentage, and very easy to do, even just setting up Windows servers. About 25%, a quarter of businesses in Canada said that they completed an audit of IT systems. Typically, it was done by an external party. And only 8% of businesses invested in threat intelligence. When we look at a formal risk assessment, both undertaken by an external party or an internal employee, vast majority of businesses, or about 20% of businesses in Canada, are conducting these sort of formal risk assessments through an external provider. So if you're a consultant in the room, that's an interesting figure where your services are needed and required by businesses, and more so as we continue down this pathway of increasing technology use in business environments. Penetration testing, or pen test, similarly, Canadian businesses were using external parties About 16% said that they used an external party in 2017 to conduct a pen test, whereas only 7% of businesses used an internal employee to do so. Just over half of large businesses conducted cybersecurity risk assessments on a scheduled basis. So about 52% of large businesses did that on a scheduled basis, whereas small and medium firms conducted assessments irregularly. This is for a friend in the room who's working in insurance, and we've been here, I think, twice or 3 times in the past, Mark. And every year we present information, we get asked, what about cyber liability insurance? How many businesses are actually purchasing the product, and what do the products cover? And so only just shy of 10% of businesses in Canada indicated that they had a cyber liability insurance to protect against cybersecurity risks and threats. And we provided, of course, a breakdown by firm size, and about just shy of quarter of Canadian businesses said that they had liability insurance, whereas only 7% of small firms indicated that they had insurance products. So what does insurance actually cover in Canada, cyber liability insurance? Overall, the majority of the policies, about 75% of businesses on average said it included direct losses from an attack or intrusion, business interruption, restoration expenses, and third-party liability and financial losses. So that's a lot of coverage for a cyber liability insurance product. And if you're a small or a medium-sized firm in this room, perhaps consider, or if you already have a policy and you don't have certain things that I just spoke to, perhaps renegotiate that policy with those businesses. There's a lot in here where it's not just a number on the screen. You could actually take this number and apply it as an investment for your particular business, or use for policy decision making in the grand scheme of things. Uptake of cyber liability was prevalent among certain industries: natural gas distribution, data processing, hosting and related services, and of course banking institutions again. And if you are an insurance provider, these 3 industries are the ones you want to target, as they were the least likely in 2017 to take up insurance products. And that was, again, the food and beverage stores, water, sewage, and other systems sector, and mining and support activities for mining, oil, and gas extraction sector. Okay, so if you didn't get a chance to read the report last week, or were oblivious to the hundreds of media outlets that were reporting these 2 figures, this one is of interest to a lot of those that are in the room. Canadian businesses said they spent about $14 billion in 2017 to protect and recover from cybersecurity incidences. Over half of it, or $8 billion, was spent on salaries for employees, consultants, and contractors. Close to $4 billion was spent on cybersecurity software and related hardware, and another $2 billion, or of the 14, $2 billion was spent on prevention and recovery methods. And those include cost of training, cost of insurance. Perhaps you were to hire professional services like a PR firm, public relations firm, or marketing legal services. It also includes ransom payments and fines from regulators or authorities, which I'll get into in a bit. And I see that I'm cutting just after 12, so I am I'm not hoping. Okay, perfect. We're doing well. Annual average expenditures differed greatly based on business sizes, whereas large firms spent close to $1 million in 2017 on cybersecurity measures. Small firms spent about $46,000, which is probably equivalent to a cybersecurity analyst's salary in a small business. Businesses in specific industries spent the most money. Pipeline transportation, if you're a business there, on average you spent about $2.2 million. Natural gas distribution, businesses in that sector spent about $1.2 million on average in 2017, and banking institutions spent about $1.1 million on cybersecurity in 2017. Of those that spent the least amount of money, our favorite sector, food and beverage stores, they said they spent about $12,000 on average in cybersecurity in 2017. And surprisingly, accommodation and food services sector spent about $9,000, or businesses spent about $9,000 on average. %21% of Canadian businesses reported that they were a victim of a cyber incident in 2017 that impacted and affected their operations. Now, this doesn't include just hundreds and thousands of emails that a business gets that are phishing attempts, because that's not what the intent of the question or the survey was. We wanted to know whether it was an impactful incident. And of course, impactful is different based on size of business and sector. If you receive a ransomware attack and you're a small business, perhaps it shuts down your whole entire operation. But if you're a large business, perhaps you're able to mitigate it better, and perhaps you didn't report that incident here, but you did report something else. When we look at the size breakdown, about 20% of small businesses in Canada reported that they had faced a cybersecurity incident that impacted their operations, whereas about 41% of large firms indicated that they faced an incident in 2017 that impacted their operations. And we did compare our statistics across our OECD partners that Mark had mentioned, specifically with the UK studies that were out. There was an earlier one in 2018, one in 2017, and one in 2016. When we compared, our numbers were plus or minus a few percentage points across the board for some of the major indicators, so we're on track. This being the first survey of its kind, collected information that is comparable to international studies that have been going on for a few years. Of interest, and I'm not going to go through every industry on here, but the top 3 industries that faced an impact were banking institutions. So about 47% of firms in the banking institutions indicated that they faced an incident in 2017 that impacted their business. Universities, also very high, and of course, if you've been following any media outlet, you'll recognize that universities are often in the news for ransomware attacks and so forth. Pipeline transportation sector, which you don't hear much about, but 45% of businesses in the pipeline transportation sector indicated that they were impacted by a cybersecurity incident. And of course, if you're a service or a software provider, perhaps these are some of the industries you want to approach to provide a service or product that can help mitigate further impact in future years. Of note here is also utility sector. About 32% of firms in the utility sector indicated that they faced a cybersecurity incident. Utilities includes the electric power generation group, the natural gas distribution, water, sewage, and other. When we look at the industries that were least likely to be impacted or were the least impacted in 2017, 5% of food and beverage stores, and I keep saying food and beverage stores, maybe I should define that for everyone here. It's grocery stores, specialty food stores, liquor stores. So 5% of those said that they were impacted, and perhaps that's why they're not spending so much on cybersecurity currently, right? If you've followed through in the past slides, I indicated that they're not spending much, and maybe this is why, because they're actually not being impacted by cybersecurity incidences. About 11% of gas stations or gasoline stations across Canada said that they faced a cybersecurity incident that impacted their business, and about 12% of businesses in the material and garden equipment. And there was a famous case quite recently, and of course I'm not going to allude to who it was, but you know, typically they're branded with an orange color. So how did it actually impact them, and what method was used to impact businesses in Canada? 40% of businesses, or about 40% of businesses, could not even identify the attack's motive, whereas 38% of businesses said that the incident that they faced in 2017 was an attempt to steal money or demand a ransom payment. The methods used vary, of course, and those who could not identify the attack's motive were able to identify the method that was used, and 46% of businesses said that it was a malicious software, whereas to steal money or demand a ransom payment, about 48% of businesses in Canada said that it was a scam, a fraud, a phishing attempt. This is Just focusing on the right here on stealing money or demanding ransom payments, scams, and fraud. Second in line is malicious software. Third is exploiting software, hardware, network vulnerabilities. If you keep your eyes to the right-hand side, sorry, I skipped ahead. Stealing personal or financial information is about the same in the first two. It was scams and fraud, malicious software. The third is hacking or password cracking for stealing personal or financial information. And about just over a quarter of businesses in Canada said that they experienced an attempt to access unauthorized or privileged areas. And about 36% of businesses said that it was through hacking or password cracking. So what was the impact on businesses from these types of incidences? And 54% of businesses indicated that it prevented their employees from carrying out day-to-day work. And about 30% said it resulted in additional repair or recovery costs. Of course, we hear this often in the media that it's a big reputational damage, there's loss of revenue, and when we ask businesses what percentage of businesses lost revenue, and it was about 10% in Canada that reported losing revenue due to a cybersecurity incident in 2017, and about 6% of businesses in Canada said that it was the cybersecurity incident damaged their reputation. What is of interest to us and to everyone in this room as well is that about 3% of businesses in Canada said that they were discouraged from carrying out a future activity that was planned, and the 3% is also considered an economic loss, of course. About 4% of businesses said they did not know or know the full impact of the incident. And 2% of businesses said that they lost suppliers, customers, or partners, and about 2% of businesses in Canada paid a ransom payment. Of course, there's often downtime associated with a cybersecurity incident, and in 2017, over half of the businesses experienced some sort of downtime as a result of a cybersecurity incident. Total downtime on average for the year was 23 hours, and this was 23 hours in total versus 23 hours by incident. This number has been verified by those in the operations unit, and if you talk to our friends at CSIRC or if you talk to anyone that's supporting the Bell infrastructure, that number is reflective. They report that it's a total downtime of 24 hours in a year for a business on average. Most businesses, so about 65%, reported that they believed an external party to be responsible for an incident that impacted them, and this is opposed to a customer, partner, or as opposed to an internal party or an unknown actor. And what Jeff was speaking to earlier, only about 10% of Canadian businesses reported a cybersecurity incident to a police service in 2017, and it doesn't really differ much by size of firm. About 8% of small firms indicated that they reported the incident to a police service, whereas only 15% of firms that fall under the large category reported that they went to a police service after an incident in 2017. The reasons or the rationale for not going to a police service, 53% said that it was resolved internally. 35% of businesses said that it was resolved through an IT consultant or a contractor, and about 30% of businesses said, well, the cybersecurity incident wasn't important enough to report, it was too minor. And of course, this is what the business perceived, not what the police service told them. So, who are businesses reporting cybersecurity incidences to, if not the police service? Well, 42% of businesses who were impacted by a cybersecurity incident in 2017 reported to an IT consultant or a contractor, and about, just shy of 40% didn't report it to any external party. And that's of interest to us as well. And I'm just going to skip over the few and move over to the red box, or the outline in the red. no one's reporting incidences to government agencies, and we know that from police services, but also less than 1% of businesses in Canada who were impacted actually reported the incident to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. About 1% of businesses in Canada reported to CSIRC, the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center that is now amalgamated into with the Cyber Center that was just recently announced. And about 2% of businesses reported it to a government agency or body, and perhaps even a regulator. Of course, we're more than interested in following what that less than 1% for the Office of the Privacy Commissioner is going to look like. In November, they're going to be announcing a new mandatory stipulation under the Digital Security Act, under PIPEDA, which makes it mandatory for businesses to report breaches of security safeguards involving personal information. And with that, I want to thank you for staying there and listening intently to the numbers. I know there was a lot there. I think Benoit and his group are going to share the slides. And I want to thank both Mark and Howard. The three of us are going to be here today and tomorrow, so if ever you want to ask about specific industry data, come talk to us. We might not be able to provide it to you right away because we don't keep, there's 155 tables. We don't keep 155 tables on us at all times, but we can certainly provide you data offline. And so reach out to us and we'll be happy to share. Thank you very much. Thanks, Benoit.